Hey folks, it's your friend Ashton, and welcome to the Rooted Rebellion podcast, the show that's reshaping the food system from the ground up. My friends, what is up? I have missed you all so much in these few weeks since we last met. Life has been an absolute whirlwind for me. I have been going through a move as well as a change in jobs. And I think that's why I am particularly eager to share the message of today's guest. I am so thankful to join you back here on the podcast today. Wherever you find yourself, whether you're going for a walk or a drive, maybe you're listening while you work in your garden, thanks for taking a Rooted Rebellion along for the ride. It is thanks to listeners like you that this show exists and continues to reach more listeners every day. If you like what we're doing here, please be sure to rate and subscribe to the show and share it with a friend that you think needs to hear. For those of you who've been following along on Substack, thank you so much for your continued support and just your outpouring of engagement on the new platform. If you haven't yet followed us on Substack, I'll be sure to link it in the show notes so we can meet there and continue the conversation. It is thanks to Substack that we are having this conversation today. I came across the work of Christine Martin shortly after launching Rooted Rebellion on the site. Of all the agricultural writers on the platform, I was drawn to Christine's honesty, her sage advice, and the grace that she encourages readers to extend to themselves in their agricultural journey. Christine's own experience shifting from corporate America to agricultural educator offers a bounty of wisdom for anyone interested in pursuing their passion for the land. She is particularly attuned to the needs and challenges of female land stewards. Through her work with Thriving Land Steward, Christine offers practical, holistic goal setting to empower folks to make their dream of tending the land a reality. Joining me today to share about the struggles and rewards of managing land alongside a hectic life is Christine Martin. Christine, hello and welcome to the Rooted Rebellion podcast.
Thank you for being here, Ashton. Thank you for inviting me to share some of my perspective and my history and my story of how I got to be doing what I'm doing. So thank you for letting me come and speak.
Absolutely. The pleasure is all mine. This connection and this episode is a really fabulous example of some of the positives that emerge from social media. Christine and I met on Substack, believe it or not. As you all know, Rooted Rebellion has recently joined the platform, and you all have been following along and incredibly supportive. So, for those of you who are already on the platform, and maybe those who aren't, I encourage you to give Christine a read. We will have much more information about her presence on Substack as this episode continues. But for now, Christine, tell us, how does a woman of the corporate world become a guru of the regenerative movement for her fellow women?
Well, thank you for that high praise. I don't know that I'm a guru, but I've certainly had a lot of lessons. So I've learned from those lessons. And you asked why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it all started when I had a corporate career. I moved to Texas 25 years ago, and the job was going to be in Houston. And I just didn't want to live in Houston. So I looked for property that was within commuting distance from Houston and ended up finding 5 acres. And built a house, and then my thought was, well, I've got 5 acres, I got to do something. So we put in the chicken coop, and we put in the garden, And we even bought a dairy cow. We bought a halflinger, which is a pony draft horse, and I use that to give rides to the neighborhood kids. While I was doing all of this, I still had a corporate job. And the reality was, I was spending much of my corporate salary on all these things that I was doing on the ranch. And it took me almost 6 years to realize that one of the reasons my garden struggled was because I had high salinity in the soil. Up until then, I had been trying to do what I was reading, what neighbors were advising, what the ag extension agents were telling me to do. And it wasn't until I hired this one consultant, and she's now deceased, but she was amazing. She was amazing. I'll never forget. She drove down my driveway. She got out of her truck and she looked at my pasture and she goes, "You've got a copper issue here, and you've got a manganese issue here, and you've got calcium issue here." And I looked at her going, "How is it you know that?" And she goes, "These weeds that you see here, they're actually mining for whatever mineral is either deficient or in overabundance." And that just flipped how I started seeing things. And then I was introduced to the holistic management framework that helps us understand that many of us, whether we're homesteading, whether we're gardening, whether we're ranching, whether we're farming, we tend to look at a problem and solve for that problem, not understanding that the problem that we're seeing on the land is actually a symptom of what's happening in the soil or happening in the ecosystem function. So now I spend my time helping people understand that we can't be reductionist in how we look at nature. You and I are both land stewards, right? We're humans. We have things that we need to do off the farm, off the land. Some of us have off-farm jobs that we need to manage. Some of us have family that we need to be in relationship with. And then there's the financial aspect of what we're doing. And going back to those years of homesteading, before I had this big aha moment, I remember looking at my W-2 at the end of the year going, I make pretty decent money. Where is all that money? Because it's certainly not in my bank account. And I would look around and say, okay, well, that's where some of it is on some piece of equipment that I bought thinking, oh, this would be cool. And then used it once and never used it again. Or I invested in the project and it wasn't giving me the results that I wanted, so I abandoned it. My kids eventually started saying, "Mom, we don't need another project. We need to finish what we started first."
How did you manage to have this corporate job while also cultivating your land and this passion that you had for stewardship?
Well, the bottom line is it was a passion. Would come home from work, you know, get up early, take the kids to school, go to the office, do my job, come back, pick up the kids from after school activities or whatever, and then come back. And I would go inside, change from my work clothes to my land clothes, and I'd be outside. I didn't know it then, but it was my way of grounding. I had a very high stress job. I started off as an ag commodity trader, and then I was trading oil and gas products. So very stressful, and being on the land was my way to say, "Oh, okay." And I had way more energy than I have now. And I just, was so excited to live this life that I really wanted to do it. But as you know, as the listeners know, being on the land is also very hard, right? Emotionally, physically, mentally, the challenge is hard. And I've learned through the school of hard knocks, through failures, through mistakes, that we need to recognize that human aspect of stewardship. now that I work with clients, most of the time I'm addressing burnout.
What does that look like? How does that present in your clients who are tending the earth while also balancing these incredibly chaotic lives that maybe don't relate to what it is they're doing on the land?
It depends on the human. For some people, it's they're exhausted. Many times they've got too many things that they've decided that they need to have done, right? Sometimes it's uh, the stories that they tell themselves. They they believe they have to do things a certain way, and the reality is that you are very different from me, right? You're a certain age, I'm a certain age. You have goals. My goals more than likely going to be different. Your values and my values, while we might have things in common, they will be very different. And what I find, and that was the lesson I had to learn, was so many times we start doing things on the land. We start a new enterprise or we start a new project because we're like, "Oh, that's neat." It's that shiny, it's the shiny thing syndrome. It's like, "Oh, I like that. I'm going to do that." Not filtering it through, does this move me towards the life that I want on my ranch? Does this fit the capacity that I have right now? And by capacity, I mean financial capacity, I mean time capacity, I mean emotional capacity. You know, I don't have a husband anymore because we weren't on the same page with where we weren't on the same page for where we wanted to be in 5, 10, 15 years. And so, it's deciding that we're going to be very careful with doing the work that is going to get us what we want. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And is this what you see from your clients? What does the typical client for thriving land stewards look like?
Because of where I'm at, geographically, and because of my network, they're either homesteaders or they're ranchers that are doing this preparing for retirement, right? They've done the corporate career, but the corporate career, yes, has built the bank account, but it's been unfulfilling. And so they're buying land and recognizing that they only have a certain amount of time to get this up and running. They start a couple years into it there and they recognize, wow, this is a lot more complex than I thought. And we're not seeing the results we want. So that's when they come and talk to me. And the homesteader, it's a similar situation, but with the belief that a homesteader should be completely self-sufficient. They're running themselves ragged. They're homeschooling, they're gardening, they're preserving, they have all these livestock, and they're doing a lot of value added. They're harvesting the herbs and they're making tinctures, or they're got the dairy cow and they're milking the cow and they're making cheese and they're making butter, and they're homeschooling and they're trying to make some money to support themselves. And after a few years into this, they're like, and then they recognize that it's costing them a lot more to produce it themselves than it is to, this is what I'm good at, this is what I'm going to do. I would love to have bees, but I knew right away I did not have time for another project. But I found somebody in my community that had bees, and so now we barter. I have meat, they have honey, and we barter. And it means I don't have to do another project. I don't have to have that time. I can actually sit on my porch in the evening and enjoy a glass of wine and not be, going to bed at 10 o'clock at night because I've got to do 6 hours worth of basic chores every day.
I appreciate how gracious your approach is to agriculture. Your business targets women
Mhm.
specifically, helping women thrive in this industry. And I would love to hear what you have to say about why women are called to it. Before you answer that, I'll say that I find it interesting, pardon me, because I think women have to be inherently good at multitasking in the roles that we've been thrust into. And so I think there is this imbalance of capacity and desire. So, what do you feel like regenerative agriculture holds for women, and how do we reconcile capacity and desire?
I love that question, Ashton. Yeah, and for those that are getting to know me, if on Substack and on Instagram, I am a huge advocate that we need more of the feminine in agriculture. And regenerative agriculture and the 6 principles does a fabulous job of helping us start recognizing that working with nature is complex and there's several variables that we need to be paying attention to. But those 6 principles were derived by men. Not that I'm dissing men, because we need men. We need their logic. We need their data. We need their focus. You know, we need their how to. But where I think Regen Ag resonates with women is we recognize the relationships,
Hmm.
right? To your point, we're multitaskers, right? We know that if we have to prepare a meal, then we've got to balance, we've got to balance the time so that we can make that meal. And if we have kids, right, and we have homework to be doing at the same time, we can divide that. So we understand all these variables that we've got to manage all at the same time. And if you spend too much time on one, the other variables are going to suffer.
And
Sure.
maybe I'm projecting a little bit, but most of the women that I know lean towards perfectionism.
Sure.
You know, we have to be high achievers if we want to be recognized as achieving it all.
Yeah. Well,
In
but that goes to where we're imposing masculine ego onto ourselves, right? Because let's talk the agriculture. Agriculture is a very male dominated industry, and it's all about ego. It's all about how much can I produce? I need more yield. I need more money. And women were like, okay, yes, we need enough money so that we can take care of the kids, right? We need enough money that we can put it in the bank so that our kids have it and provide for educational opportunities and clothing and all this other stuff. Masculinity has been conditioned into us. And again, I am not dissing on men, but I think to your point, Ashton, women have been doing a lot, but they haven't been recognized for it. No?
which is ironic considering some of the first farmers to exist were likely
We're,
women in the home.
right, because the men were, hunter gathering or whatever, and they were at home taking care of the children and preparing the food, right? And taking care of livestock or whatever. So, but regenerative agriculture, I think, also resonates with women because of the relationship, but also because it values the observation.
Mm.
As I work with more and more people, and I facilitate workshops that are co-ed, and I have male clients and I have female clients, women tend to observe better than men. Right? What does that mean? That a man goes and goes to an event and he comes home and the wife is like, well, what was so and so wearing and what was said and what food was there? And he's like, I don't know. Right? His focus is completely different. Women observe, and if we're going to be in relationship with nature, we need to have that observation skill. The other aspect of regenerative agriculture is it promotes the nurturing aspect that us women inherently have, right? We want to help things grow. We want to help things get better. And there's a reason why regenerative agriculture is so important and necessary right now, because we've had decades of the masculine extraction that has depleted soil health and caused all sorts of issues with water quality, climate concerns. And so we need to bring in some of these feminine traits, including collaboration, because we're not going to do it alone, right? We have to do it in community. But we need the people stewarding the livestock with the farmers and the ranchers and the agencies and the nonprofits, because ultimately, if we don't have good soil, we don't have anything.
Amen. Where, for people who are entering regenerative agriculture, where do we find our limit? For people who are excited to engage in this life-changing way of viewing the world, where do we accept that we can only push ourselves so much without meaning our own detriment and detriment of the land?
Sure. So as you were asking that question, I'm thinking, ooh, that's a hard question. How am I gonna address that? And I think the most important aspect to address that question is we need to be more self-aware than we are. And I think I think that's the biggest problem. At least I found that was my biggest problem. And as I work with other land stewards, it's that self-awareness, right? We have a goal, because we all have a goal, we all have a vision, we all buy land, we all move, we move back to the family land because we have this vision, or we have a value that we're trying to honor. We're keeping the family and the land in the family. We want to produce healthy food. We want to take sovereignty over what's available to us. Everybody is going to be doing this for different reasons, but we have been conditioned to be, and I think this would be a whole podcast episode in itself. We have been conditioned to be disconnected from ourselves. And I say that because most of us have been told that we need to study hard, we need to go to college so that we can get a degree, so we can get a job, so that we can make money to then buy the house and pay for the mortgage and have the family and buy the cars and buy the vacation. And so we have been forced to separate ourselves from what we really want so that we can do what is expected of us in this culture, which is to have a career and do a job. And I don't know about you, but in my career, what I studied was not necessarily what my work ended up being, right? It was completely different, just because I had to follow opportunities and whatever. But my desire, my passion was not even close to what I was actually making all this money on. And we're seeing now that our people want to have more authority over the jobs that they have, that they actually find some of themselves in doing the work that they're being asked to do. So I shared I was a commodity trader. I was a very good commodity trader, but it was high stress. I had to pay attention to the market. I had to pay attention to all the news. But what I really wanted to do was go and sit with the animals out in the pasture, because that's what brought me joy. That's what my mind said, this is what you love.
And that's where you're called,
Well, and thank you, but the reality is that we have become so disconnected from ourselves that many times what we actually value, what we actually desire, is not what we're doing. And so when we transition to do what we actually value and what we actually want to be doing, that we're honoring the purpose for what we've been put on this earth for, to your word, if we're honoring our calling, then we are more connected to the results, right?
When you are describing this need to follow passion as a part of this endeavor, I have this image in my head of an ecosystem.
Sure.
We can pretend we're not organisms in an ecosystem, but at the end of the day, no matter how many smart devices we have, that's what we all are.
Yeah.
I think I might have someone who is more versed in biology could possibly argue against me, but let's think of it this way. A frog in a pond has a specific role.
Sure.
And that wasn't assigned to the frog. It is something that has evolved from the frog's innate ability.
Sure.
And I think when it comes to regenerative agriculture, we all have a different role to play, whether that is a consumer or producer. And when we try to stray from that, stray from what we know in our gut or in our heart to be true, that's when complications arise. And I think it speaks to your point that we are so far from this point of connection to organisms in an ecosystem that we are completely out of context and we are being just launched into roles that are detrimental to us all.
And thank you. You said that very nicely. And the reality, and I made this point a little bit earlier, right? You're a very unique individual, as am I, right? We might have similarities, but I have my uniqueness, my experience, my knowledge, my gifts might be completely different than your gifts. And we've been given this uniqueness for a purpose, whether you believe in God, whether you believe in universe source, right? We're all very uniquely and divinely made for a purpose and a reason. And many of us, have had successful careers, but that doesn't mean that it was who we truly were. And I'm seeing the shift of these people that are coming back to the land because they recognize that connection to the land is important, whether it's for food, whether it's for climate concerns, whether, all the different reasons why people are coming back to the land, the disconnection. It's a way that we can be who we're supposed to be. We're not being a cookie cutter. And the example that's coming up to me is my job. I was a commodity trader. I knew what my responsibilities were. I knew what my goals were for my job. I knew what I needed to do to achieve those goals. So it was a very controlled environment. And I was doing as I was told, and I was doing as was expected. Despite the fact that I knew what I needed to do on the land, the major work that I had to do when I transitioned from my corporate job to being a full-time rancher, and now as a coach, educator, speaker, was to work on myself. I will be perfectly honest, and I'm rotating the animals every day, and in the beginning I did my grazing plan, and I'm like, okay, this is where the animals are going to be, and I would go out and I would set up the paddock, and then the next day I would go set up the next paddock, and I would get pissed off when the cattle dared to get out of that paddock. I would get so angry. And
you don't have control, and it's frustrating.
Exactly. It's like I was trying to control this, yes, maybe, it was because I didn't set up the electrical wire properly, but I started recognizing that I was fighting something that I was never going to win, because nature is going to do her thing. And and that anger was doing me no service, right? Because now my stress level, now I'm in flight or flight, and it's like, you know. So I had to do a lot of internal work to say, I have to shift my whole mindset from a very controlled environment to being in relationship, to give and take, and that, yes, I can plan for a result, but the reality is I'm likely not going to get that result, but I'm going to monitor and then adjust accordingly so that I can keep moving towards the result that I think needs to happen.
Mm. The lessons of regenerative agriculture far transcend the practice. And you wrote this fabulous piece on Substack. And I think it's actually how I came across your work in general. And that is the connection between stewarding the earth and regulating your nervous system.
Huge, huge.
Can you share that parallel and how it has changed how you view the practice?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for the kudos, the compliment on the article. Um, I, that has been a huge part of, as for me, for being a land steward, and also being a coach, an educator, right? I had the ranch when I took my early retirement, but the education and the coaching was a new business. And I'm a solopreneur. It's just me, myself, and I.
It's a difficult road to walk.
So I have to wear multiple hats, and some of those hats that I have to wear, I'm not very good at. And I had to recognize that I wasn't very good at, right? Then it comes back to that self-awareness and say, I suck at this. I need to outsource it. I need to hire somebody to do it, or I need not to have to do that. One of those three options. Um, and where the nervous system regulation really came into play was, I I do multi-species, and my biggest profit maker enterprise was the pastured turkey. And I was raising a batch of 50 turkeys every month throughout the year, and except for Thanksgiving that I did between 100 to 150 turkeys. Uh, and it was a big seller for me. Ground turkey and turkey breasts and turkey wings, because not a lot of people do pasture turkey year round. uh the people that like turkey, were my best customers. But then the summer of 2023, summer of 2023, all of a sudden I started recognizing that I was having I had a lot more inventory in the freezer when I came back with the new processed batch. And I was because my turkey cuts weren't selling.
So you had to pivot.
So yes, I had to pivot, but before I had to pivot, I started seeing it in my cash flow, right? Because now it's sitting in inventory, and when we're selling direct to consumer, we depend on those regular sales in order to pay the bills. And because the sales weren't happening, I was struggling with paying the bills. And as I was struggling to pay the bills, and again, I like multitasking, but I'm not good at everything that I do for multitasking. So it didn't occur to me until a few months into it that my problem was that the turkey cuts weren't selling. But what made me recognize this was that financial pressure, that I was struggling to pay the bills. I learned something very important about myself, that when I experience financial stress, I completely disassociate.
Mm.
It was much easier for me to go to Netflix and streamline Outlander, right? And be drooling over Jamie Fraser and all this other
Don't get
stuff.
me started. That's another episode.
It was much easier to do with that than to deal with this other aspect that was causing it, right? And when we get into stressful situations, especially when it comes to finances, we're so focused on, I've got to pay the bill, I got to pay the bill, I got to pay the bill. How do I pay the bill? What do I need to do to pay the bill? That we become so tunnel vision that these things can be happening in our blind spot that we're completely unaware, right? And so I'm paying the major bills, but I'm not paying some of the bills. And then after a few months, the fact that I wasn't paying those other bills, the blind spot stuff, all of a sudden it's like, ooh, now I have this problem to deal with. So that's when I had to recognize in myself that I am my own worst problem. I am the weak link in the operation because of the stories I tell ourselves, because of how I handle stressful situations, with how I respond to things. And so that's where nervous system regulation comes out. When we get stressful, sometimes our communication deteriorates, right? You're short with people, you might be angrier, you might not communicate at all. And all that comes back to nervous system regulation. And in general, as land stewards, we're very, 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 very poor at recognizing this huge amount of stress that we're under.
Well, I think that's because the stress can exist, but it can't stop you in this line.
And that's a fabulous point, Ashton. Many of us, we have a very narrow band of stressors that we can navigate. And it's not that we're never going to have stressors. It's the process of expanding that band to be wider so that when the stressor happens, you recognize it and you're like, oh, okay, I tend to do this, but I know I tend to do this, so it's not going to affect me like it used to do.
It's becoming resilient alongside your land.
It really is. And it's but we have to do that original work, right? And we've got previous trauma that is coming in, and and stories that we told ourselves, and habits that we all have habits, right? Some of those habits are not always positive. and recognizing this habit is not helping me do whatever it is I need to be doing. So it's about expanding that band of where we go off the chart with our reactions to being more aware and saying, I recognize that I do this, and I'm going to handle it differently than I did before. So to your point, to become more resilient that way.
The title of your Substack publication is The Messy Middle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is this the middle we're discussing?
This is the messy middle we're discussing. It's for those people that are doing this, and they're starting to recognize this is a lot more complex than I thought, right? Because so many of us have learned to live in a very controlled environment, and now we're dealing with a very complex environment. We've got Mother Nature that is throwing all her curveballs. We've got the financial aspect that we've got to manage, and that we've got the social aspect, the quality of life, our own humanity that we're having to manage. And that's a lot. And when we make a decision, so many times we're focused on one thing and we're not taking into consideration how that decision is going to affect the other aspects. For example, when I was doing my corporate career, because of the conditioning that I was a single parent at that time. I needed to make more money to provide for my children, and so I had to chase the corporate ladder, and which I did, but it also meant that my my time with my children was less, because part of my job was going out to dinners and weekends away, because I had to be out with customers and clients and all these other things. And so my children were raised by a nanny because I was busy chasing this corporate salary. Yes, I had fun, but and my mother was very, very supportive, and she kept telling me, Christine, it's not quantity, it's quality. But in hindsight, that the quantity is important. And so I sacrificed my time with my children to chase the corporate salary, right? And if I were to make that decision now, knowing what I know now, maybe I wouldn't have made that decision, because I recognize that I have children that I'm responsible for. I'm a single parent. You know, the other parent was not around. Uh, anyway, that's a personal example, but we need to make sure that we understand that we are now in a very complex environment, and adjust our management and our decisions and our mindset accordingly.
What's the greatest barrier to entry right now with agriculture?
I was at a homesteading conference a couple weeks ago here in Texas, and I can't put holistic management on my banner because people are like, huh? Huh? So I decided that I was going to be creative, and I said, and my banner said, it shouldn't feel this hard.
And I bet that resonated.
And I had a lot of people come and approach me. They're like, well, what are you selling here? And so we had a conversation, and some people walked up because they were curious, and I would ask them, well, does this resonate to you? And they're like, yes. I said, why? And the most frequent answer I had was, we're finding it hard to find land that we can afford.
Yeah, and that is a struggle I know countless individuals are facing just on a level of housing. And with our farm, Orion Farmstead, we searched for a solid 2 years before we were able to find land to even lease within our price range. You know, in Western Montana, all of Montana, just like across the nation right now, it is incredibly difficult to even find a livable wage, let alone to be able to purchase land.
Yeah. Especially as young people, right? And I've seen it here in my area. Most of the people buying the land are people that are they have an off-farm job. They've been able to save, and they have that off-farm job to support them. But to your point, if your income is gonna be based on uh off what you produce off the land, it becomes uh it becomes a challenge. And this is where I think we need to do a better job of matching the land stewards, where the heirs, HEIR, the next generation doesn't want to get back on the land, and match those that are retiring or close to retirement, or even those people that are absentee landowners, with the younger generation that is interested, that is excited, that have the energy, and do a better job of matching that to get them on the land, so that when these operations go through this transition, we're not selling it to housing developments and data centers.
Absolutely. So, as the years wear on, new threats emerge. But what advice do you have for people who are trying to manage these incredibly chaotic lives with the genuine desire to do right by the land and their community.
It is my opinion that it all starts with being very, very clear about what is important to you and what your vision, your goal is for this time on your land. And be very clear. And if you're in partnership, if you're doing this with several generations or with family, to make sure that everybody's on the same page so that you're all moving in the same direction. I find that many times I'm talking to couples and she's got the passion and she's the initiator, and the husband's like, I'm just doing what she's telling me to do.
Mm.
And if she didn't have this passion, he would be doing something completely different. So it's very, very important that you're both on the same page. Everybody in the operation is on the same page, because this life is hard. It's hard and it takes dedication. And there's days you just want to say, I quit, I'm selling, I'm just done, right? But we keep going on because this is part of what we're made. This is part of our purpose in life. So being very clear about what is important to you, what you value, and where you want to go. And then if you're first starting off, to recognize that your learning curve is very high. And I know people can study a lot, and there's YouTube University, and you can listen to all of these people on YouTube, and there's fabulous information. There's so much information, it's information overload. But the reality is, you're seeing what works for them.
Mm.
And translating that to make it work for you is where the big challenge is. And as when we started off, I shared burnout is something that I constantly addressing with my clients. And the burnout happens because you start with too much too quickly. And the learning curve is high, and you're spending all this money and getting very little return on this investment. And so the advice is, if you're first starting off, figure out what is important to you, whether it's making money quickly, whether it's, starting with something that if you've always wanted llamas, then do the llamas, right? But work on the llamas, get that working really, really well. And then when you've got that working really well, you've worked out all the kinks, you're making money, you're producing whatever it is you want to produce, then you take those profits that you're getting from the llama operation, and you're investing in the next enterprise. And then get that working really, really well, because, and I find this especially with homesteaders, they believe they need to start doing everything all at once. And the reality is, after you add up the hours that you're spent doing this and the mistakes you've made, it's cost you 5 times more to produce it yourself than it is to go buy it in the store. Now, I understand the quality in the store is a concern, and that's why many people are raising their own food, but you can find other people that are producing that have the same values as you do, that would be cheaper to go buy from them to have you do it yourself.
Christine, what about this work keeps calling you back? Why do you feel most rooted? How do you feel most rooted in this practice?
I don't know about you, but I need to eat at least twice a day.
At least.
At
Sometimes
least,
it sneaks you
if
more.
not more, if not more. And what the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing is, I 23 years ago, I recognized that the food I was eating, what was causing many of my symptoms and my children's symptoms. And I didn't want to do the conventional route, take prescription, whatever. I looked for the root cause, right? because when you go to a doctor and you say, I've got pain, the doctor says, here's your pain medication, rather than figuring out what's actually causing the pain. So I finally figured out that my root cause for my symptom was I was eating the fast food, and I fell in love with Kraft macaroni and cheese.
Oh, it's so
And
hard even for me now, even knowing what I know.
yeah, but I felt the physical symptoms, and it turns out I have a soy allergy.
Mm.
So, and you start reading the ingredients on food products, and everything has soy lecithin of some sort or other. So for me, it's I need clean, nutrient-dense food to keep me healthy. And the only way I learned how to do that was to work with nature, to improve soil health, to improve the four fundamental ecosystem functions, so that I can get the quality of food that I needed. And the result of using these practices is I haven't had to use a hay bale in it'll now be 4 years in the wintertime,
Mm.
because I've grown enough grass, I've increased the carrying capacity, I've increased ecosystem function. So now I've got warm season grasses and cool season grasses, warm season grasses in the summer, cool season grasses in the wintertime, and I've got this stockpiled forage, so I don't need hay. So that means I don't have to spend money on hay.
And that is the sort of system level thinking that we need.
Yes.
And you have so much wisdom to offer. And I have seen it not only in this podcast, but in the podcast of your own and your Substack. So, for our listeners who want to learn more about you and the work that you do, how can they best connect with you?
On Substack, you can contact me there. I have a website called Thriving Land Steward. What I offer is also listed there. I do have my podcast. The name is kind of wordy, and I'm going to change it this year, but I haven't figured out what I'm going to rename it to. But it's
And that's the messy middle right there.
yeah. So right now it's called Regenerative Agriculture: Thriving as a Modern Rancher, and I have been doing interviews, and I have some solo episodes where I'm basically sharing holistic management and how it is to implement holistic management in your operation, whether it's farming, whether it's homesteading or ranching. And I'm sure on show notes you will put that contact information, but would love to help you. My passion is I don't want land stewards to have to go through what I experienced in the beginning, where I was throwing away all this money and investing all this time and not getting what I expected out of it. So I want to help you get the life you want and get the land working as effectively as we can, quicker. And I understand some people need to do it themselves and they need to learn from the school of hard knocks, but I'm here to guide you so that you're making fewer oops in your management.
Well, Christine, thank you for your incredible generosity with your time, with your wisdom, and for all the work that you have put into this passion project. Thank you for joining us here tonight.
Thank you, Ashton. Thank you for listening to me, and for the listeners that will be listening to this. I'm sorry. I might not have been very coherent, but my heart is there to share.
That's a great tagline.